Chair recognizes the gentleman from Van Buren, Representative Shipley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the Iowa House. I think this is an important bill. I think this is an important discussion. I appreciate everyone's passion and perspective on this issue. This is probably the most serious topic we've addressed so far. There is a crisis of identity in our nation, in our state. I guess I just want to share a couple words on how I think we got to this point, and I know some of the things that I've been seeing and reading and educating myself with, just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page on what we're dealing with. But I definitely respect everyone's opinion. I think this is very important that we talk about this as a state, that we're able to go home and have these conversations with our community and really make sure that we build consensus around this topic. So what brought us here today? And I think I'm a little bit frustrated because there are some serious concerns that have been out there that really aren't being addressed and I think might actually be purposely being neglected. I think one of the important legal questions at stake is a young person's ability to provide informed consent for a therapy of this nature. And I think that question is severely compounded, especially when you combine the element of acute mental stress on the situation. It's my understanding during the initial Dutch protocols that pioneered puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, if a patient was presenting, co-founding emotional mental health distress, they would be excluded from the cohort. Now we're saying that it's a necessity that kids will commit suicide unless they immediately receive these treatments. So that's a pretty big gap from where we've been pioneering this from. And it's important because the WPATH standards of practice and care, they do ultimately go back to those initial Dutch studies. Sorry, there's just so much to this, and I know there's a lot of emotional pain, and frankly, I think it's important that we recognize the depth of the emotional pain and that we find ways to work together to heal, to ensure that everyone has the formation of an identity that'll provide a healthy and happy life. I think if that was happening with some of the gender dysphoria, transgender we're seeing, I don't think this would be much of an issue. If there wasn't a class action lawsuit against the Tavistock Clinic in London where the Royal Courts of Justice ruled, and they explain their reasoning why they felt that a 16-year-old is actually not competent enough to provide informed consent to these experimental therapies, or ensuring that when the therapy is presented, it's clearly presented in wholeness and truth, that it is experimental, that there's not been a randomized controlled trial detailing this. That's something the patient needs to know, and that's not being communicated. So I would like to see the opponents of this bill address the issues that were brought up at the Tavistock Gender Clinic. I think that would alleviate a lot of concerns and contribute to a more fruitful debate rather than just accusing each other of harming kids. Another thing that happened last month, Jamie Reed, she's a queer person who worked for 4 years at the Children's Transgender Center in Washington University, St. Louis. She filed an affidavit last month with the Attorney General of Missouri. A lot of interesting stuff in here that I think the opponents of this bill really need to reconcile and address, and that the people of Iowa also need to be a part of that conversation. She states in a signed and sworn affidavit, and she's married to a trans person, by the way, I personally witnessed center healthcare providers lie to the public and to parents of patients about the treatment or lack of treatment and the effects of treatment provided to children at the center. I witnessed staff at the center provide puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to children without complete informed parental consent and without an appropriate or accurate assessment of the needs of the child. I witnessed children experience shocking injuries from the medication the center prescribed, and I saw the center make no attempt or effort to track adverse outcomes of the patients after they left the center. So that's from a queer person filing an affidavit in the state of Missouri. Don't ignore these things. These are things that is in the public consciousness and the public discussion, and the people of Iowa need a fair hearing on these facts. I guess next I want to talk a little bit about the WPATH Standards of Practice and Care and the Government Oversight Committee that we had with Dr. Mborick. Oh. So a lot happened in that Government Oversight Committee, and I think we need a lot more time to delve into those issues. The WPATH standards of care, that's what we're being told provides the justification for these hormones and these treatments and these therapies. And Dr. Mboric said, that the support of these therapies was scientifically proven. Scientifically proven is what was said to the Government Oversight Committee. And we heard similar testimony from other legislators who used terms like overwhelming evidence. Scientifically proven, Dr. Mboric said. But when you actually look up the WPATH standards of practice and care that they claim to adhere to, they don't use that language at all. They say the number of studies is still low, and there are few outcome studies that follow youth into adulthood. Therefore, a systematic review regarding outcomes of treatments in adolescence is not possible. That's in their standards of practice and care. Yet she's telling the Government Oversight Committee that it's scientifically proven. And some people are repeating those things as if they're true, when all you have to do is read a little bit and see that the rhetoric doesn't quite match the reality. What's truthful? Another thing that came out, we asked about this phenomenon of detransition. Detransition is important because that's one of the things that Sweden cited when they restricted these treatments. And yes, the treatments have been restricted, Dr. Baith. They admitted that they don't quite understand the phenomenon of detransition. Some studies will put it between 2 to 4%. Other surveys say maybe 8%. Nobody would ever say something as irresponsible as 1 in 1,000. I would love to hear that sampling, examine that cohort. But it's important because it's in the standards of practice and care. WPATH says you must be prepared for patients who may detransition. Yet when we asked Dr. Mboric about that, did she provide a straightforward answer? Did the other gentleman from Unity Point, did he have any idea what we were talking about? No, they didn't. What's it called when a medical practitioner is unable to meet their standards of practice and care? And when they can't answer straightforward questions about that. So in that state of ambiguity, when the legislature has the authority for the practice of medicine in this state, yes, we have a responsibility to step in. When we're hearing from patients all across the nation talking about their personal experience and how when they speak about their personal experience, they're bullied and they're silenced and they're ridiculed and said, oh, you were never trans to begin with, that's why you detransitioned? I mentioned the story of Chloe Cole on my Facebook, and one of the transgender activists, rather than being sympathetic to this young person's story, they called her a liar. That's how committed they are to the practice of science and medicine, is they're not even willing to listen to these people's stories without calling them names. So there's a lot to this. There's a lot of emotional pain. I hope we can work together to heal. I hope we can have an honest discussion about identity, forming truthful identities. I know we've been called uncompassionate. I think telling a person they can only be okay if they take a lifetime of treatment, I think that's not very compassionate. I think we need therapies that work and are effective. I could tell you the story of the transgender funeral that I attended after a suicide. I won't, because I know how upsetting those emotional issues become. But I'm just really thankful for men like Representative Holt for taking head on these very, very important issues. For those that pretend that there's nothing to talk about here, I would contend that there is a lot, and that it is incumbent on us to provide an expectation of help, not harm, for all children, all genders, when they're practicing medicine in the state of Iowa. So thank you, everyone.
Chair recognizes the lady from Johnston.